All statements and opinions expressed by guests of the Adult in the Room podcast are strictly their own and do not necessarily reflect the beliefs or opinions of the host, producers, or advertisers. All interviews are presented in their most complete possible form in the interests of free speech. No statements should be interpreted as financial, legal, or medical advice. Listener and viewer discretion are strongly advised.
It's the Adult in the Room podcast with Victoria Taft. That's me. Good day to you, Victoria Taft on the Adult in the Room podcast. How are you doing? Today we've got a couple of really big, important topics to discuss with Americans. We're going to talk about the Trans-Tifa person who shot up that school. We'll do that after we talk with our guest about another huge issue, I believe, in this country, and that is when federal prosecutors and the DOJ get so far out afield over their skis and they start cutting checks that their bodies can't cash, and neither can their cases. And we'll talk to John Wilson, who's written a book about his problems with the feds. It's called Varsity Blues, the scandal within the scandal. And he would know because he was in the middle of this disastrous operation by the DOJ what year was that? Just a few years ago. He's been in hell for 7 years because of it. And the Adult in the Room podcast welcomes our guest today, John Wilson. And thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate you doing this. And I know it's not fun, really, to talk about this kind of a terrible thing that befell your family. And we really appreciate you doing that because I know it's just left you spent emotionally and economically and everything else. How are you today? Where do we find you?
I'm doing fine. I'm in Cape Cod at our home in Hyannis in Cape Cod.
Lovely. That is lovely. And so you're living the life as best you can in a beautiful setting. I'm glad. And you are a person in finance. But can you tell me how you got into what happened? How is it that the feds targeted you for an operation against parents who paid people to get their kids into college? And could you include what the hell was this crime anyway? I've always wondered about this Operation Varsity Blues. And it seems to me, I'm like, is this a victimless crime? I'm trying to figure out who the victims were and who the perpetrators were. Talk to me about the first time they come knocking on your door and what you were charged with.
Sure. That was a very frightening story in itself. I'd never been charged with a crime or arrested in my life. So you can imagine my shock when I got off an airplane in Houston, Texas, going to meet a client, and getting off the plane, 2 FBI agents arrest me in the airport, handcuff me, push me against the wall, and tell me I'm under arrest for honest services fraud. I was shocked. When I asked them, I said, "What is that? What does it even mean?" I was even more surprised. What they said to me,
that mean?
"We don't know. We've never heard of it before." The FBI agents arresting me didn't even know what they were arresting me for. That's how crazy this crime is, right? It was just shocking. But that didn't stop them from taking me into the car, bringing me to their center for processing. And then they started compounding the pressure on me. They didn't just bring me to a judge, they threw me into a federal prison for 2 days. I was in a federal prison in Texas with 850 inmates. And they bring me to this prison, they hand me off to these prison guards, and then I'm now walking with shackles around my legs and handcuffs. They then strip me down in the prison, and 2 guards hose me down with these power hoses when I get naked in this large shower room. And then they give
Right.
me a jumpsuit. And before they put me into the cell block, my cell block had about 60 or 80 people in it. It's like you see in the movies. It's a 2-story cell block with a guard booth on the end with big plexiglass windows so they can observe. And before they put me in the cell block, and I'm talking, saying, "I don't even know why I'm here." They didn't believe me. I
Mm.
think one of the guards probably felt maybe I was telling the truth. He said, "Hey, watch your back in there. You're an older white man. They're all going to assume you're a pedophile in here, and they hate pedophiles.
Oh,
And someone's
jeez.
probably going to try to stab you with a shiv." I was shocked. I said, "What?" I had no idea why I was even there. And now I was worried about someone stabbing me, right? This is just how crazy this thing started. And I spent the next 2 days just in fear every time someone came near me. I asked the guard even, could you put me in my cell block? Can you just lock me in my cell rather? I had a cell with another person. He says, no, you can't go into your cell, not until lockdown. You can go in there, but if you stay in there, they're going to think you're a real, you know, PUSSY, and someone's going to try to really F you up. They're going to really F you up then. I said, well, what do I do? He said, just watch your back. And so that's how this thing started. That was just day one of Operation Varsity Blues, as the government called it, right? And they just used me and abused me and intimidated me at every step in this process. I'll tell you, they charged me like everybody else with honest services fraud. And this case was really all about wealthy people abusing their privilege. And I get that. Well, there were some parents who were working with this man named Rick Singer, the center of this controversy, a confessed
Right.
con man, who were cheating on tests, who were bribing coaches, who put together fake profiles for their kids. And that's wrong. Is it a federal felony? I don't think so, but it's wrong. And maybe it's a crime to put in a cheating on a test. But I didn't do any of those things. And
Uh-huh.
yet I was wrapped up in this case because they needed me. The Boston prosecutors needed me for the Boston venue. So if you step way back, there were 3,000 clients that Singer had across the country. No, not across the country. They were all in California. A few were sprinkled in other states. I was the only one of 3,000 clients in Massachusetts. It turns out that Massachusetts prosecutors found this case from a random tip from someone in Connecticut. And once they saw there were famous celebrities involved, like Lori Loughlin and Felicity Huffman, they
Right.
knew this would be a high profile case that could really boost their careers. So they wanted this case desperately. They really wanted it. And so they needed to do two things to get the case because everybody was in California. Singer was in California. The college were in California. 95% of the parents were all in California. So the case should have been held in California. But they wanted it in Boston to bring the media out to Boston to help boost their own careers. And so they needed to be able to say there was a conspiracy amongst the parents, which was totally false, but they could claim that with the judge. It got overturned at the appeals court level. They said there's no conspiracy amongst the parents here. And then they needed to have one person in the conspiracy who was based in Boston, and that was me. And so that's why they charged me. I was literally the only person out of 3,000 clients that lived in Boston. And it didn't matter that my facts were totally different than all the other parents' facts. They needed to charge me to bring this case to Boston so the media spotlights that could boost their careers would stay focused on them instead of having the case moved to California with some other prosecutors. And
I
that's
mean, we,
how personal motives can really affect your whole life this way.
um, yeah, we are just watching some B-roll of the prosecutors, and they're holding court with the presser that they gave on your case and the others. And so you saw very shortly after you were dragged in kicking and screaming that they were putting the pressure on you to do what? What did they want you to do once you got into federal custody? I mean,
They wanted me to plead guilty, and they did
mhm,
everything they could possibly to plead guilty. So you have to step back. My case was completely different than these other cases.
mhm,
These other parents confessed to cheating on tests and bribing. We didn't do any of that. My daughters, for example, I had twin daughters. They got a perfect score in the ACT and a 99 percentile. To put that in perspective, fewer than 4,800 kids out of 1.8 million get a perfect score, right? They didn't cheat and they were never accused of cheating. They got a perfect score and a top 99% score. They were really smart. My son had a 93. My son played water polo for 6 years at the national level and he swam for 10 years. He was a member of the USC team. He joined the team and played on the team. His verified swim times prove he's one of the fastest players. So we didn't cheat. My kids were all highly qualified. All my donations went to the school, didn't go to anybody personally. And I got a receipt from USC for my donations. And they said, that's a bribe. I said, what? The judge in the trial that they handpicked declared to the jury that giving a donation to a school can be considered a bribe to the coach. First time in history. Now,
mhm.
we got convicted because of those jury instructions, but that got overturned, thank God, by the appeals court. But they
Oh,
did everything possible to try to get me to plead guilty.
so they were pressuring you, and they
9
wanted.
felony charges. They charged me 180 years of prison time. 9 felony charges for making a donation. And they did that every month. They would add on more charges every 3 months, add on more charges. And they said, if you don't plead guilty now, we're going to add on more. And at the end, I said, look, you can charge me trying to assassinate President Kennedy. I'm not going to confess to a crime I didn't commit. So keep piling them on. I don't care if it's 180 years or 300 years. And that's when they finally stopped after they charged me with 180 years of prison time.
Did you ever learn during this process if anything that was done at these private institutions, at least, Harvard, private, Stanford, private, USC,
USC, private.
private.
Right.
What the, what are the federal prosecutors doing there? Did these supposed dupes and victims call the federal prosecutors to come and get the person they've been doing business with for years? Does this then condemn the usual processes by which rich people get into some of these places by giving money and buildings and stuff? It sounds like it's the same deal. How does this apply any differently?
Right. Well, I think there's two differences that were relevant in this case. First, there were some parents who were cheating on the test, right? So their kids were not qualified. I made sure my kids were very
Wait,
qualified for
wait, wait,
this.
wait, 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 wait. I understand. You guys are clean, thank God, and you beat this rap, but you're not done with them yet. I hope you sue the
Right. I'm
pants
still
off them.
fighting them. Yeah.
But but cheating on a test, that's not illegal.
I think it
It
is. When you go through the wire, when you send the test results in through the internet, that's mail fraud
oh
and wire fraud. That's what they get people on. And they also then said the coaches
wow.
who were part of this were part of
Wow.
what they called honest services fraud, that you were duping the university. And that's one of the big things that the appeals court said in my case. It was crazy. They said this is the first time in history and the only time in history where the alleged victim of a bribery scheme is the one who got the money and gave me a receipt for the money. So USC got the money. They gave me a receipt for the money, and
Uh-huh.
they've been allowed to keep my money. I said, how could that be a bribe if the school still is allowed to keep my money? It makes no sense. So the prosecutors had contorted the law, this honest services fraud law, and then the related mail fraud, wire fraud. They kept piling on all these charges over and over in a way that made no sense. It's not commonsensical, right? It really was just something they did to try to force me to plead guilty and to build the case. These prosecutors went on to $1 million payrolls in large partner roles in big firms, right? So they go from $150,000 federal job to them becoming a partner in a major law firm with the notoriety that comes from this kind of case where they can make $1 million. So you can see the attraction. They want this kind of case and
Of
they need
course.
a conviction. They need a conviction under any circumstances. Even if you're innocent, it doesn't matter. So they railroaded through this trial process that was outrageous. And I'm just shocked that they were able to do it. And they were able to do it in large part because they handpicked a judge. They judge shopped for the oldest judge in America, the oldest
Oh,
federal judge in
shocker.
America, 87 years old, who approved all of their motions 98.3% of the time. He made Joe Biden look young.
That guy wasn't on senior status yet. He
He
was
wasn't
still
even
on
on
the
senior
bench.
status. He was on full-time status, the oldest
Wow.
full-time judge in America, and he approved their motions 98.3% of the time. So I'll tell you the kind of things he blocked. He blocked my evidence in my trial 660 times. So my daughter's perfect ACT score, not allowed in. What? This is a certified ACT test score. He said it's not admissible into a trial about college admissions, right? My
Hmm.
son's certified swim time that proved he's one of the fastest on USC, his own high school water polo coach couldn't bring that in because he wasn't the swimming coach and he didn't witness it. They had these crazy arguments, the prosecutors against bringing my evidence in. And then we had all this evidence about USC doing this all the time. You asked the question earlier, are
Yeah.
colleges doing this? Colleges are doing this all the time.
Yeah.
They've got about 10 categories they've been doing for decades where they have either donor families or they have political VIPs or they have legacy people, they have faculty children, they have athletes. Many colleges have many categories where they give a bump in the admissions process for different characteristics or different, things that people do, whether it's a donation, whether that's you have a friend on the board of trustees, you get a referral or recommendation. And this has not been illegal ever. And so this is
Yeah.
the first time they tried to make this a crime, and the judge defined this as a crime with my jury. Making a donation to a school is a crime. If the judge or the coach gives you a bump in the admissions process, and they called it a quid pro quo, if you get a bump in the admissions process for a qualified kid, I understand maybe if someone was not qualified and they were cheating, that's fraud, but we didn't do that.
How was Richard Singer getting away with this for so many years, but cheating for some students, not for others, and
He
that
was a
sort of
very
thing?
knowledgeable con man. He was an expert, right? So he conned even the FBI in this case. The FBI said they trusted him
Ha
in the
ha!
beginning. So
I
he was a
wondered
very
about
skilled.
that.
He's a very skilled con man, right? So this is what he did, and it's kind of evil genius in some ways, kind of thing. He had a legitimate business where he had 99% of his clients were legitimate. They said, right? They called them wholesome accounts and dark side accounts. That's
Hmm.
one of his colleagues said that. So he had literally 3,000 parents, and he only had 30 parents who were charged here, right? So only 1% of his clients were charged with a crime. So 99% of his clients were innocent people like me. And he did real services. So he had a whole company that had many tutors that could help tutor your kids for, taking the SAT or the ACT tests. He had real charity work that he did. I would take my son to Sacramento to do volunteer work and community service. And he knew a lot about all these schools. He was incredibly knowledgeable. He was like an encyclopedia. He knew about all the colleges, but he also knew about my son and all of the high school teams in the country that played water polo. My son was a water polo player for Stanford Club, and he knew all the top 10 schools. So he had a very good knowledge base, and he did real legitimate services, and he networked through some of the most powerful institutions in the world. So what he did is he networked through Goldman Sachs, in my case. He
Hmm.
worked with Goldman Sachs for years and got many of their clients. And so my Goldman Sachs advisor that I knew for 10 years called me up when my son turned to be a freshman and said, we've got this great resource, this guy named Rick Singer, who's done consulting for many, many people, including Steve Jobs. He had many famous clients. So you have Goldman Sachs call you up and say, here's this great guy. He runs the biggest company on the West Coast, helping parents and families figure out what school is the best fit for their child. He does all kinds of tutoring for your child to get better on, SAT tests and so forth.
Mm.
And he's doing work with some of the most famous people in the world. So you trust him. And he worked with us for 7 years. So I trusted him. He did real stuff for 7 years, tutoring and that kind of thing for my son and then later my daughter. So we had no reason not to trust him. I only spent a little bit of time with him, right?
Uh-huh.
So he came highly recommended and he was doing legitimate services for my kids. So I thought, this is great.
There
And I
was,
donated it through his company. That's it.
you donated to his company, and then he in
Through his
turn gave
company. And then he gave it to
through,
USC, right?
and
Exactly.
you got the receipt
I
for
got
the
the receipt.
donation.
Right. And the reason he said you should do that through him is that you then don't get hounded for more donations. I know when I've given money in the
Yeah.
past, I've given a lot of money. Once you get on their list directly, they just call you and call you and call you for more donations. He said, look, give it through my foundation. I'll get a check. You'll be CC'd in the memo section of the check, but it won't be in your name. It'll be for my company's name or he had a foundation. My foundation's name. It was like the United Way of giving, he said. We'll be the
Mm.
United Way for college giving. That's what he said. They were the United Way for college giving. You donate to my foundation will give to the school you pick, and then you'll get a receipt from the school. That's
So
why we did it.
who's on the take at the school then? The coaches, right? The coaches and the
I don't think so.
AD
Some
and
of them may have been. I don't think they were. They did this as a fundraising. So you look at people like USC, they used walk-on candidates as a major fundraising vehicle. So at USC, for example, they had about 300 athletes admitted every year through a process called Subco. And that was a subcommittee of the admissions committee. And about 40% of those candidates were what they called walk-ons.
Mhm.
Scholarship kids were recruits at the highest level, right, for a Division I school. Walk-ons were kids who played the sport at varying degrees and could be, for lack of a better phrase, a practice player who could develop over time to be a starter. And so they had lots of walk-on spots at these different schools. And so the schools sometimes would use those walk-on spots as a great way to develop money. So if you made a donation commitment, we met with the school, they would say, you make a donation commitment. If your kid gets in, then we'll put you through the admissions process for athletes, the subco. And if your kid gets in, you give us $200,000, whatever it is. So I met with USC. We didn't just do this blindly. I didn't just trust Singer. I trusted Singer, but I didn't just trust him blindly to donate through him. I actually went with my wife and my son to USC. We went to the
Mhm.
university. We met with a coach and we met with a development person. And we said, is donating through Singer acceptable? They said, absolutely. We've done it many times. I said, okay, great. So I verified this with the coach and the USC development person. So we didn't think there was anything wrong. And when my
Right.
son got in, he joined the team. He played one of the fastest kids on the team. And we gave our donation. And they said that was a bribe. USC, that was a bribe. I said, how can you give me a receipt for a bribe? I didn't even know you could give me a receipt for a bribe. What's a bribe receipt?
So, yeah. So these are the people who said that, oh yeah, no, we do it all the time with Richard Singer. And
Right.
and
But
so
then at my trial, they had a different tune. So what happened is at my trial, they changed their tune. So years later in the trial, they said, we never do that. That's a bribe. That's illegal. So that's what they claimed. They actually got on the government bandwagon and they totally changed their tune and said, that's illegal. That's a bribe. You can't do that. You can't give somebody a boost in admissions in exchange for a donation. That's a quid pro quo and it's illegal. I said, what? That's what you told me. And they're still doing it to this day, by the way. But they said at my trial that that was illegal.
So you got these prosecutorial peacocks strutting around in Boston who are trying to make a name for themselves so they get the big ticket, the golden ticket at a law firm when they leave the government's service. And they got to get some big heads to put on their walls. And you're one of them because you are, a very wealthy man and person who runs in the highest circles of the elite. And all of a sudden you're rolled up, but what they don't understand is that you've got the means to fight them, and you fight back. You do not plead guilty. You plead not guilty.
Right. I fought
And
them every step of the way. I was one of only two parents out of 50 people that fought them every way. So they knew that most people had the resources. That wasn't what set me apart. I think what set me apart is I had the grit and the tenacity from my, difficult upbringing to fight them. I didn't grow up
mm,
wealthy at all. I grew up in poverty. I grew up on welfare with a single mom in the public housing projects of Hartford, Connecticut. I picked tobacco from the ages of 12 to 16, 50 hours a week to help my
wow,
family make ends meet, right? So this was not a spoiled, brat, prima donna person. So
right,
I grew up in the school of hard knocks, like a lot of people, right? I had a difficult childhood, like a lot of people, and so I was willing to fight. I'm willing to fight for what's right, and I don't mind taking my knocks, and I don't mind. I'll pick
sure,
tobacco 50 hours a week, and I'll do whatever it takes to clear my kids' names. So I was not going to plead guilty. They offered me the opportunity to plead guilty every step along this way,
sure,
right, for 3 years, and everyone else did plead guilty because one, they probably had worse facts. Some of them probably were really guilty, but it depletes you financially, but it depletes you emotionally. It
oh,
takes a
absolutely,
lot of willpower to fight these guys. And my wife and I talked about it a lot. Should we just plead guilty? Because it's cost you millions of dollars to fight these guys. It took my entire life savings. As wealthy as I am, it's depleted my entire life savings, right? I
well,
was successful.
they're playing with house money. You're playing with your own.
Yeah, exactly. They have unlimited resources, and they can just pile on, all kinds of excess costs. Just for example, the data they gave us in the beginning of this case was 5 million documents. Think about that, because I had everybody in it for years and years. Just to scan those documents in a readable form, they didn't give it to us in a readable form,
Oh,
cost me $350,000 just to put the documents into the computer. That's how big these files. These are 5 million documents, many of them many pages long, right? So that's what they can do. They can inundate you with that kind of thing. And as I said, they piled
sure,
on charge after charge, 9 different felony charges in the end, to pressure you. And my wife and I said, do we want to plead guilty? We can save the millions, just go to prison for something you didn't do and move on with our lives, right? And we thought about it long and hard. But the biggest reason we didn't want to plead guilty and we agreed not to plead guilty and fight was because we wanted to clear our kids' names. The one thing we did, if we had to plead guilty, we'd have to confess to this crime that we didn't do,
hmm,
but that would reinforce the false narrative they were spinning, that these parents were making these bribes because their kids weren't qualified, right? That was the whole narrative here. These parents, rich parents, had kids who weren't qualified, and they were bribing coaches and cheating on tests because their kids weren't qualified. I
hmm,
had highly qualified kids. I was making a tiebreaker boost. And the reason we did that was because the odds of getting into Harvard, even for a highly qualified kid, or Stanford or USC, are only 5% to 15%. And Singer and the school said, hey, if you make a donation, you'll increase those odds maybe 600%. You might go to 60% or 80%. I said, oh, great. I'll do that. I'll make a donation. I've always given money, and education changed my life, and I've always given to educational
hmm,
institutions. So why not do that? So we didn't plead guilty. One, because it would reinforce the false narrative that our kids weren't qualified. Two, because I couldn't live with myself publicly confessing to a crime I didn't commit.
yeah,
And three, what the government did was wrong, and we wanted to fight. I'm a big fighter. I'll fight for
yeah.
what's right.
Has anybody been fired or been booted out of the legal profession as a result of your
No,
complaints?
they gave themselves all hero awards, literally hero awards. About
Oh,
16 people in the Boston office that got this hero award for this case, even though
wow.
they smeared innocent children like my children. This to this day, they still say my son is an alleged athlete. They know my son had a world record. They blocked it from the trial testimony. They know my son was one of the most highly qualified walk-ons in USC's history in water polo. They know his swim time proved he was one of the best, fastest on the team. They blocked all this evidence. We know they had it because they blocked it one by one with the judge.
Yeah.
And yet they say my son is an alleged athlete.
Why did they say it wasn't germane? I'm just kind of curious about what the judge's mind thought process was to get rid of exculpatory evidence like that.
He just
Aren't you?
whatever the prosecutor motioned, he just approved it. He just instinctively approved them 98.3%. So the prosecutor would say, object, hearsay, object, whatever, and the judge would say
Mhm.
sustained. So he just literally sustained their motions more than 600 times to block our evidence. So once the prosecutors, we did hear from one of the prosecutors who left, who was talking to somebody who was a friend of a friend at a law firm. He didn't know it was a contact of mine. They were
Mhm.
talking about this case. He was bragging about this case. And he did say to that colleague, he said they were shocked at how supportive the judge was. They knew they handpicked a very supportive judge. They said they were even shocked at how supportive he was. And once he started approving everything, yeah, once he started approving everything, every motion they made, they went off the deep end. He said they just literally blocked everything because they knew
Yep.
the judge would let him do it. So
Yep.
they literally blocked everything in my case. It was
You
just
could you, you
absurd.
could have you could have appealed everything, but you
I
would have
did
been there
appeal,
for the rest of your life.
but we did have to go to appeal. So what happened is we had to go and get convicted because you can't fight this judge. He's the supreme authority in the courtroom. And the judge even said when we were objecting to all this stuff, he says, go ahead and take it up on appeal. I said, take it up on appeal. That's what he said is, what? So you don't let us put this evidence in? Take it up on appeal is what he would say to us. I said, okay. And so we had to go to the appeals court to get it overturned. And that
Isn't
has cost us
that
millions
is
more.
very unusual for a judge to routinely say, well, you can just bring it up on appeal. I mean, we're all looking in the cheap seats like we're watching a ball game when we go, well, that's an appealable offense. I mean, he can bring it up on appeal. But thing is that he should be able to give you a fair hearing.
Absolutely. You know what he said at the end, which is my judge, my lawyers, we had some of the best lawyers that money can buy. And at the end of towards the end of the trial, the judge was getting frustrated. He said to my lawyers who were trying to submit evidence, we had to do things what were called offers of proof because the judge wouldn't let it in. We had to make an offer of proof for the appeals court to preserve the record.
Yep.
So we were going through this process. And at the end, towards the end, the judge said, how much more do you have? We said, we got 60 more, whatever pieces of evidence. He said, I'm just going to dismiss it all en masse. So you don't even know what it is. I'm just going to dismiss it all en masse, he said. It's in the court transcripts. He just dismissed the rest of our evidence en masse without even knowing what it was. What? How
That
could
sounds
you
like
do
one
that?
of those judges that Trump had in New York. I mean, that was crazy.
Well,
That's
they
the only other
handpicked this
time I've ever
judge.
heard something this wild.
They
I beg your
handpicked
pardon?
this judge. And the way they did that, the judge shopping they could do, it's also crazy. So they used me for the venue for Boston. And then within the
Yes.
Boston venue, what they did, they sprinkled there were 50 defendants, if you recall. They sprinkled a bunch of low-level cases, a test taker over here, a coach in Texas over there, some of the administrators who worked in Rick Singer's organization, right? They sprinkled these cases. They
Mm.
got like 5 out of the 7 federal judges in Boston. And when they got the judge they wanted, this fellow who's now 87 years old, they stopped. And then they amended his docket and said, now we're going to make this all one giant conspiracy. And we're going to put all the parents on this judge's docket. So they changed my charges and made this a giant conspiracy. So they picked the judge they wanted. They literally got to pick them by hand. And then they put everybody on that judge's docket. And that's how they were able to get all the parents into this one judge. And so we had literally like 33 cases with this one judge who was basically a rubber stamp for the prosecutors.
Were you the only person who didn't do anything wrong?
I don't know. I can't say for sure. What I saw a lot of the other parents, there were definitely guilty acts, right? I heard every other parent agreeing to a lie. And Singer had these ruses that he would do with the FBI. He would say, hey, I'm being investigated by the USC athletic team or athletic committee. And, your son or your daughter was X or Y, but they really weren't. And so when they call you, you got to lie to help me. And they would say, yeah, on the phone, right? And he would do that kind of thing in the text. He'd say, the IRS is auditing my foundation. It's all
Mm.
fake and I'm bribing. And they would say, yeah, I'll support you, right? So these parents and the other parents were cheating. We cheated on this test. We got you a whatever. And they would say, yeah. So he got everybody to say that. The only things he got me to say were, I would almost call them, double entendres. So the worst thing I said when Singer said to me, are you okay if we give a check to the coach? I said, yeah. We'd given a check to the coach before at USC. It was a check made out to USC. And we gave it to the coach because you got to give the check to somebody. You don't just throw it in the water. And so he said, are you okay if we give a check to the coach? I say, fine. But in my mind, that was a check made out to USC. It wasn't a bribe. It wasn't made out to the coach's personal bank account. And it was made out to USC, and we got a receipt for it. But when
Hmm.
you hear 30 other parents, and the way they did this at the trial, saying, we're going to bribe the coach, we're going to bribe the coach, we're going to bribe the coach, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then they hear my phone call saying, are you okay if we give a check to the coach? The jury thinks I'm bribing the coach when it was just an innocent check to the coach made out to USC.
So your cases were they were done at the same time?
Yes, all 30 of us were together. And then in my case,
Oh, I did
because they said it
not
was one
remember
giant
that.
conspiracy, they said it was one giant conspiracy. So what they did is they then put in all these other 30 parents' bad acts. And that was not allowed either.
And that's
They
used against
polluted
you.
the jury. they just polluted the jury with 30 other people
Mm.
saying these bad things. We're going to
Oh,
bribe, we're
wow.
going to cheat, we're going to do this. And
Okay.
then they say, well, Mr. Wilson's just like them. Well, no, I wasn't just like them. But after you're a jury, you hear all these other people's bad acts. You say, well, he must be like them too. The government's not going to charge an innocent man, especially one that I had more charges against me than anyone else. Everybody else had 1 or 2 charges. I had 9 felony charges. So people had to think, where there's smoke, there's fire. I know I would. If I were a juror, I don't blame them because they got to see none of my exculpatory evidence. Then they were overwhelmed with 30 other parents' bad acts. It
Yep.
had nothing to do with me. I didn't know these parents from a hole in the wall. The closest I ever got to Felicity Huffman was watching her on TV.
So you couldn't sever your cases. They wouldn't
We
let you
tried
do
to
that
sever them,
because it
but the
was a
judge,
grand.
of course, would never let us sever them.
I
They
see.
handpicked the judge who wouldn't let us sever them. So we were stuck with
What
all
a
these 30 other parents.
Well, what a travesty. First of all, they pick a venue that you're the only guy who lives there. Everyone else is in California. So all
Yeah,
those
300
Hollywood
people had to
people,
fly back and forth. 300 people had to fly back and forth 6 hours each way. Prosecutors and witnesses and USC people and defendants and lawyers. Yeah, 300 people versus me flying to California if they had it in California, right?
right. Just to let these peacocks do their thing and strut their stuff.
Yeah.
I bet you don't miss these guys, do you?
No, and I understand their motivations. I've worked in large organizations, and I don't think everybody in federal government is bad. I think most people are hardworking and honest people, but I think there can be a few bad apples. And unfortunately, in the prosecutorial system, the bad apples can rise to the top because they can cut corners, they can run roughshod over the justice, and they can weaponize justice for their own purposes, whether it's political purposes, like you see with President Trump, or whether it's for their own personal vendettas, or whether it's for their own career, like in my case.
Yeah.
They can actually use and weaponize the system of justice for their own purposes, and that's a risk and a bad thing in society. When they can handpick the only check and balance on that prosecutor is a judge. When they can also handpick a judge, the car goes off the road. It can literally create absolute power in the form of tyranny with those prosecutors because there's no check and balance. So if you get a corrupt prosecutor who handpicks their own judge, they can write their own ticket, and you're just going to be roadkill.
I know that it's not nice. I know it's unethical. I know it's cheating to pretend you're on a team or pay some guy under the table to take a test. I get all that. How does that make it a felonious event, a conspiracy? You don't know any of these people, so you're obviously not in a conspiracy with them. It's all the Richard Singer thing. And it continues to just be a mind blower. But you said something really interesting as I was watching the Netflix special, the documentary on you and the other parents. And what I noted was that you said that he bamboozled the FBI and the DOJ as well.
Right.
Explain that.
When he was first arrested, he was never arrested. Singer was actually never arrested. When he was first confronted, he then pled guilty, and he agreed to cooperate. And he tricked them in multiple ways. He actually ended up getting burner phones without their knowledge, and he warned some of his clients. He didn't warn me, but he warned some of his other clients. But he was cooperating, and they testified on the stand because some of his phone calls were made to me when he was cooperating, that they trusted him. So the FBI agent on the stand said that they trusted Singer in the beginning. And so, for example, there was a very important phone call that was made to me, the very first phone call when he was cooperating, and they didn't record it. It was a very exculpatory phone call. They never recorded it. It's
Or
unbelievable.
did they lose the recording? You know how
They
that
lost it if
happens.
they did record it, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was very exculpatory. I remember it very clearly. I was on the call. My daughters were on the call. My wife was on the call. Uh, and then they say, because they weren't on the call, they said Singer just said it was my daughter, so it didn't need to be recorded. But that's not the case. FBI rules don't allow them. He was making this call from their own offices. Singer was sitting in the FBI offices with 6 prosecutors and FBI agents, and they all said they left the room when he made this call. He had set this call up 3 days before while he was in their room with them too. And they said they all left the room for the entire time he was on this call with us, and they
That's
didn't
nuts.
record it.
That's
It's just
nonsense.
it's not possible that it happened that way, but that's what they say. And they say we trusted Singer because Singer told us that it wasn't with Mr. Wilson, just with the daughters. How can that be? This is the introductory call for my daughters, right? How
Mhm.
would I introduce my daughters and not be on the call to introduce them? My
Well,
wife and I.
you
It's
don't
like,
you don't seem like a guy who would delegate something like this
they're
to his
16 years
daughters,
old. I'm not going to say,
right?
and Singer's 55. Oh, just have a FaceTime call with this guy, Rick Singer, and introduce yourselves. There's no way in hell I would do that with my
So,
vulnerable daughters.
where did your daughters end up going?
We don't want to say they went to very good schools, but we don't
Okay.
say to protect their privacy.
Yeah. Okay.
My
I
son finished
understand.
up at USC,
Hmm.
and did very well. He got a 3.0 in his economics degree, so economics major. So he was
Good.
talented as well, but he struggles because of the his entire identity was tied up in athletics. He spent 10 years working for probably $700 a year round, competing on 3 different teams year round, and for the government to call you an alleged athlete. And people who knew him knew that wasn't true, but people in the social, media circles, you
Sure.
know, just destroyed him, the trolls. And so
Hmm.
the most difficult thing for this for your kids is, social media and the internet makes their scars both deep and permanent.
Yeah.
And it's just hard to walk away from that. So they've been devastated. My daughters, think of my poor daughters, they were 16 years old, right? 16 vulnerable teenage
Mm.
girls, and having the federal government say you're unqualified and that you cheated, right? And when they know it's not true, it's just horrific. And how do you defend yourself as a 16-year-old girl against the federal government claiming that you're unqualified and your dad cheated because you're unqualified?
A few minutes ago, I showed the op-ed that Harvey Silverglade had written in the Wall Street Journal, how Varsity Blues swept up an innocent father. Aggressive Boston prosecutors targeted John Wilson, whose children were legitimately accomplished athletes. Of course, Harvey Silverglade is a person known to this podcast audience. We've had Harvey on a couple of times. One time when I wanted to just speak with him about his wonderful book, Three Felonies a Day,
Yeah.
and then after, when I discussed this with him, I found out he was John Eastman's attorney. And you want to talk about somebody who was just a victim as well? It was John Eastman. So, did you have any interactions with Harvey besides this op-ed, or did you know him? Or
No, I didn't know Harvey at all. So Harvey took an
Mhm.
interest in my case. It was fantastic. I think he reached out to my lawyers first and talked to them about my case. And
Uh-huh.
so he was very helpful. And I didn't pay him anything for this stuff. He's not my lawyer, but he was
Right.
just interested in doing what's right. And he saw this case because he's based in Boston, he's based in Cambridge. And he saw this case. It was a high profile case. And he saw the facts and he said, this is just outrageous. And he likes to try to tackle, I think, lightning rod kinds of cases like this where
Yeah.
there's an injustice. And so I was just happened to be lucky to get his attention and his support. And he's been a wonderful resource. Now I've met him after he wrote this article. I went to meet him,
He's a
wanted to
good
meet him in
guy.
person and thank this guy. He's a
Mm.
wonderful man,
He's a good guy.
and incredibly smart and highly ethical and highly motivated. So he
Right.
was trying to help me just out of the sheer goodness of his own heart and to do what's right for society. So I admire Harvey and I'm very appreciative. But
He's good.
he was
He's
not my
good.
lawyer. He just did
Uh,
this out of truth and justice and the American way.
the
Kind of
American
old
way. No,
fashioned old
yeah.
fashioned values.
He and Dershowitz, of course, are besties, and
Right.
they're thick as thieves. And so, what's cool is that he just calls balls and strikes. He doesn't. What I enjoy is that he doesn't pull punches. He tells you exactly what's on his mind. Sometimes, if I ask a dumb question, he'll be very nice and try not to say, "Victoria, that's a very dumb question." But
Right. And
other than that, I mean, that's pretty good.
I admire his candor, which is fantastic. And I think at this point in his career, he doesn't have to bullshit anybody, right? He
No,
doesn't have to fluff topics, and he
no.
can speak his mind, and he's going to speak his mind, and the truth is what motivates him, and doing what's right was what motivates him. And so I admire him, and I'm very appreciative of what he wrote. And I can't think and say enough positive things about him.
So you've got your book out, and it's been out for a few months. And let me just show the photo again. Varsity Blues, the scandal within the scandal. The other thing that you've done is you've redoubled your efforts to go after these guys,
Yep.
and you are trying to fight back on an IRS penalty, which a judge essentially threw out. But the other thing is that you're going after Netflix too, and you've
Netflix
come.
and USC, right?
Yes,
Right.
get them.
I'm a fighter. I'll fight to my last penny and my last breath, defending my kids and to try and do what's right here. What they did was so outrageous. And the tax conviction I'm fighting, it's a $1,400 difference on my tax return.
Yeah.
I deducted it on the wrong line. I overpaid my taxes by 120,000 that year, and the government acknowledges that. I had the wrong state on my tax return. I was working in Europe and living in Europe. I had Price Waterhouse and Goldman Sachs doing my taxes. I didn't even read them, and maybe I should. I didn't read them. I just DocuSign them. I trusted
Hmm.
them. But that doesn't matter. Once you DocuSign it, you're responsible for everything in there. And if you put something on the wrong line, that can be a federal felony, even if it's $1,400. Like, are you kidding? That's what they can do. They can stick you with that kind of thing. So I'm still looking to fight that. But we're also after USC and Netflix. And Netflix was probably the most egregious thing because Netflix came out with a movie that focused on me before my trial even happened. And they poisoned the jury pool. I'll never forget. If you've seen the movie, you see
Yeah, you
how
didn't look real good in that movie.
it was horrible. They just
No.
painted me as the worst of the worst. And they did that by splicing my quotes with other people's bad acts. Because none of the allegations that I did were wrong. I did nothing wrong, but these other people are cheating and bribing and doing all this stuff. And they're taking pictures of kids standing in the shallow end of the pool. We didn't do any of those things,
Mm.
but they have my voice and then they cut to somebody else. And so they can use with filmmaking techniques, they can use my out of context sound bites to make me sound bad when they put it with a picture of somebody else doing something bad. And
Hmm.
so they did that, but they were warned in advance. We gave them, because they announced this movie, we gave them a 550-page warning letter from my lawyers that had all of the exculpatory facts, all the facts in my case that were proving my innocence. Right? We had all those facts. I also voluntarily took a polygraph test for 2 days with the
Wow.
head of the FBI polygraph division and the head of the CIA polygraph division as a separate independent quality control. These guys were the best in the entire world in polygraphs. I spent 2 days with them. I passed all of their tests with flying colors. We gave Netflix all of that information before. And we asked every question. Did you cheat on the test? No. Did you bribe any coaches? No. Did you put anything false in your applications? No, 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 no. Yes, whatever those questions were. Passed them all. Netflix had all of that and they ignored it all and just railroaded me through their movie because they wanted me for what I was mentioning was a trip to Versailles. And they said, this is the epitome of excess and
Oh
wealth
yeah.
because I was going to have a birthday party at Versailles. You can rent out a room at Versailles, by the way, for $80,000.
Mm-hmm.
Every 10 years, I have a big birthday party. So I was going to spend $80,000 renting out a room there. That made me the icon for evil and excess.
Oh,
And
they made a big deal of that in the movie and the fake documentary. But and I was going to ask you, and I
so
thought,
we're
well,
suing
that's
them, and we
tacky.
won. We won the first round, which is great. We won the motion to dismiss in
Good.
Superior Court, Massachusetts, and now we're getting discovery, and we're getting fantastic materials in discovery. And you're seeing how they used me and abused me on deliberately in this process. They didn't do any fact checking on me. They did fact checking on all the other parents they were putting in there, and they literally put me in with 10 other parents who all pled guilty. It's like, wait a minute, you have all these parents who pled guilty. Why'd you put in one parent who didn't plead guilty?
Yep.
And to add insult to injury, they've never updated the movie. Even after I got all my charges overturned for that related to Varsity Blues, they never even updated the movie and said, well, by the way, Mr. Wilson was exonerated by the appeals court on all the Varsity Blues. I got this one tax thing, for $1,400. They didn't even update their movie, and it's still playing to
No,
millions of people out there.
I just watched it today, and what they say is you pleaded not guilty. That's all they
That's
say
all they
about you.
say. They don't say I won in the appeals court and all the things overturned. They don't say that I took a polygraph test. And you know what they also did, which is just really shocking to me, is a lot of parents who are accused of putting in these fake profiles of
Right.
taking a Photoshop picture of their kid, like sitting on a rowing machine and then putting them in a
Sure.
boat.
Like
Or
Lori Laughlin's
in the case
kids.
of my son, in the beginning, they have a picture of a kid standing in the shallow end of a pool with a water polo ball, a little scrawny kid, and then they Photoshop that. My kid was a real water polo player, right? So they put those kind of things in there. What they did, Netflix, they took my son's actual photo playing water polo that was in the government records, and they photoshopped it, made it so blurry you couldn't see his muscles, you couldn't see he was a real athlete. So they did just what they accused the parents of. They took a Photoshop version of a real photo to serve their own purposes. In the case, all these parents were making the kids look better. And in Netflix, they made my son deliberately look worse and made him so blurry you couldn't see he was muscular in the
Oh.
movie. So they took my son's actual photo and blurred him down through photoshopping so you couldn't see that he was a real athlete.
You're accused wrongly. They stack the deck against you. You are found guilty. You appeal. You are exonerated. But in the meantime, they made a movie about you before your trial even came up and designated you as a bad actor. What are you suing them for?
We're suing them for defamation because they
Defamation.
smeared me before the fact. And I got to tell you, when you watch that movie, you come away very certain that I did, everything that everybody did wrong. And we did some focus groups on this. Very interesting. So when people watch the movie, they're absolutely convinced that I cheated, I bribed, my kids weren't qualified, they were all fake athletes, etc. Right? They're absolutely convinced. That's the impression you get from the movie.
Wow.
And then when we show the focus group, this is very interesting. We show the focus group, Mr. Wilson's, kids, they didn't cheat on the test, and his daughter's got a perfect score and a near 99 percentile score. Does that change your view of the movie? You know what they say? No, Mr. Wilson's an idiot. He didn't believe his kids were good enough to get their own scores, so he bribed somebody to cheat. So they still believed I cheated and I bribed, even though they told them we didn't bribe, that we didn't cheat. They got a real test, but they still believed the movie more than the facts we share with them afterwards. And then when we finally said to them, you know, here's a picture of Mr. Wilson's son playing water polo, and you see this big muscular kid leaping out of the water, and he really did join the USC team. Here's a picture of the USC team, and he played on the USC team. And here's his swim time. He was really one of the fastest players on the team. Only then did they say, wait, really? Then this is not a documentary. This is all fake. And that's when they concluded it was fake, right? But it took that much evidence to convince them. And I'll never forget that when we did a focus group before my trial,
Wow.
a couple of parents who'd seen the movie, you know what they said? They said, these parents are worse than Hitler. They said, I was worse than Hitler because I had murdered every child in America's dreams for college. That's what they said. I had murdered every child in America's dream for college.
Yep.
That's what I said. So that's how it poisoned the jury pool. Think about that.
Oh,
Right?
absolutely.
You're
It was
sitting
around George
mirror.
Floyd. Wasn't
Yeah,
it
you're
around
sitting-
the George Floyd time?
Yeah, it was. You're sitting behind a two-way mirror, and you're listening to these parents being interviewed about and saying, you know, what do you think about these parents? And even though we didn't cheat, we didn't bribe, I made a donation to a school with my own hard-earned money to give my kid a tiebreaker boost in admissions. The school verified this was fine, and we did what they told us was fine. We followed the school's rules, and yet now all of a sudden I was worse than Hitler. I said, really? How
Wow.
can that be? But that's how much a film like Netflix and the prosecutors whipping up the anti 1%, you know, wealthy people gone wild. Now, everybody presumed I was born wealthy, as I mentioned. I wasn't born wealthy. I earned every penny I have, every penny I had. It's all gone now. The old-fashioned way through hard work and sweat and, you know, a strong education. So it's kind of crazy for them to think that, you know, they could use me in their movie the way they did without consequences. So I'm going after them. And we're
You're
also going
going
after
at
USC.
USC and Netflix.
They
Those could
defrauded us.
potentially. I beg your pardon?
USC defrauded us because they told us at the school that this was all fine, but then at my trial they said, no, this is all an illegal bribe. So that meant that everybody back in 2014 was lying to us and defrauded us. And so that's the basis for the statute of limitations that we're pursuing. Now that's a tricky argument. They're saying the statute of limitations, the judge said that that should have been started when you were first arrested. We said, no, when I was arrested, I didn't think I did anything wrong. I was innocent. And so we've lost the first round, but now we're appealing that at USC because we did not get notice when we were arrested, when I was arrested, because I didn't do anything wrong. I wasn't aware of doing anything wrong. They said, you knew what you did was wrong. I didn't know what I did was wrong. I thought what I did was right. I only learned at my trial when the government and the USC people said, oh, that's wrong. You can't make a donation to the school and get on a team and get help on getting on the team. That's a bribe. That's what they said. That's a bribe.
What? Forgive my ignorance, but what year was your trial again?
The trial was in 2021.
Okay. So you're part of a quote unquote conspiracy, but you don't know you're part of a conspiracy because you don't actually know anybody else involved in this quote unquote
And we followed all
conspiracy.
the rules and had kids who really were talented and qualified.
And
And
then
made a donation and got a receipt.
in the statute of limitations on a conspiracy, we learned is 10 years. So
on a conspiracy, but that's on with respect to USC, we're calling it's fraud. It's not necessarily a conspiracy to commit fraud, but maybe
I see.
maybe fraud is a statute, I think, of 3 years, and we learned that we're saying in 2021. Once we filed that in 2024, but I don't know if conspiracy to commit fraud. Maybe that's a different angle. I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, I'm sure you got really great attorneys. You were working on basically.
Now I'm working on contingency because I've spent all my money. So I've got law firms working on contingency for both Netflix and USC. Right.
So when do you expect that to go to court? I mean,
Netflix will probably go to court next year. They drag it on. That's what they typically do. And they don't usually settle until right before court or right at court. But I want to go to court. I want to get the facts out there. I want to clear my kids' names.
Yeah.
You know, for me, this is much, you know, I'm very old now. I'm, you know, past my prime. I've got whatever years left. But for my children, you know, they're in their 20s. They've got 50 to 70 years ahead of them. And they have to live with this stigma and this false allegations and false accusations. And it's just so despicable that people who are supposed to protect innocent children, like federal prosecutors, can just go the opposite way and deliberately smear them with false statements to try to pressure me to plead guilty and to try to make a case against me. To call my daughters unqualified, to call my son a fake athlete or an alleged athlete when they know the truth, that's just despicable.
Yeah. Wow. You win. You won the the big case. I mean, in against the feds, but at what cost? I mean,
Yeah, and where do you go when you win to get your reputation back? There's a
that's
classic
right.
expression that way, right? So they've
Shoot,
destroyed my
Ray
reputation.
Donovan.
They've destroyed Ray Donovan. Exactly. So you look at those kind of things and you say, I'm willing to fight. I'm a fighter. I fought my whole life. I fought to get out of poverty, and I'll fight for my children to make sure their futures are as positive as I can make them.
Hmm.
And I'll fight to my last breath against both SC and Netflix and the government. We're still going after the government in a couple of ways.
Oh
We
yeah.
hope to get new evidence. We hope to get new evidence to be able to reopen or do a quorum nobis. It's called motion as well. And as we're doing discovery on Netflix, we're getting more and more very helpful information. I'll share more
Oh,
on that when it's out there in the public, but
oh,
we're getting
okay,
some very in discovery in this process is opening up a lot of interesting doors. And so we're getting some new facts that could be helpful.
good. I hope you wipe the floor with these people, and I
For
would
my
love to.
children's sake, I hope you're right, and I hope we get more coverage for it. That's the biggest thing. And this book is one step in that direction. By the
Yeah.
way, your audience should know that none of the proceeds of the book are going to me. It's all going to charity,
Oh,
three different
nice.
charities, including one which is legal defense fund for people who don't have resources. Because as painful and as brutal as this experience has been for me, it's been a 7-year nightmare for me and my family. We're lucky. I had the resources and the grit to fight because I still feel blessed. Many people don't, and that's why most people plead guilty, even if they're innocent. And so I
Right.
want
Oh
to do what
yeah.
I can to help make sure this doesn't happen to anybody else, and to provide some resources for people who don't have the financial means to fight. To fight.
Yeah, the threats by prosecutors against people who've been rolled up by these guys and who are terrified out of their gourds was one of the things that Harvey Silverglate put in as one of the most odious things that prosecutors do to people, just to start stacking charges, stacking and stack. They're not supposed to stack charges, but they do it anyway. And then they say, well, you know what? Sucks to be you if you continue to forestall going for a guilty verdict or a guilty admission, then we're just going to keep piling on the pain.
Yeah,
And you keep fighting. Thank you so
I
much.
kept fighting. Yep. Well, thank you for taking the time, Victoria.
Yeah, thank you, John Wilson. Wow, we. I'm going to watch your case. I'm going to keep watching this. This is amazing.
All
Just
right.
an
Yeah, the
amazing
next
thing.
year will be interesting. We'll see what happens with Netflix in particular.
I hope your attorneys are excited. I hope they're very excited to go after these guys because they know there's a
Yeah.
payday somewhere.
Well,
Right
we want the
on.
truth. We want the truth to get out there too. Yeah.
Oh, me, yeah, well, me too. That's awesome. Thanks so much. I appreciate it. Oh, wow.